evening, everyone. Welcome back to Witches the Moon. I am your Friday hostess, Natalie, and this week we are discussing ethics in witchcraft. This topic is a hot-button topic for a lot of people. There's a lot of debate about how to draw your ethics in witchcraft. I've had discussions with people of the Christian faith, of the Judaic faith, and even a couple of people who practice Islam regarding ethics in witchcraft. The general consensus among those faiths, the religions of the book, is that if you aren't following the teachings of a specific person who is supposedly speaking in the name of God, then you don't really have a moral compass or a right to judge the morality of a certain issue. And I disagree with this very highly, because nobody says that to a Buddhist. Nobody says that to a Hindu. You know, we all have our beliefs. I believe that your moral compass comes from deep within universal law. I don't think it has anything to do specifically with any religion, to be frank with you. I think it deals more importantly with being human. And I have seen a lot of what I would consider unethical behavior in the craft. And I'm not talking about cursing or hexing or any of that. I'll get into that in a minute. I'm talking about just downright low-life type behavior, stealing other people's ideas or art without giving them credit. And I'm not talking about sharing a picture on Facebook that you found that you may or may not know who the artist is and saying, gee, this is cool. If you do that, I think you have a duty, a moral obligation, an ethical obligation to tell who the artist is. If you know, if you don't know, ask. Or tell somebody, you know, I don't know who this artist is, but I really liked this picture, and it would be great if somebody could help me credit the artist. Okay? And that's one aspect of ethics in the craft. I think a lot of people are concerned when you talk about ethics in the craft. It's kind of a pitfall, because ethics is such a broad topic and it covers so many different things. Now, as many of you know, I come from a medical type background, okay, in my regular field of work, my day job, so to speak. So I view ethics from a specific viewpoint, okay? To me, unethical behavior in the craft would include, as I just said, stealing somebody else's ideas, words, music, art, expression, etc., and using it as your own, kind of implying that it's your own personal creation without giving any credit to where that inspiration came from. And I did a video on this for the biophilic alternative that I entitled Plagiarism. I have a real problem with people that do that, because I have a good friend who runs a shop. She has a very heart-centered business. She makes her own candles and her own spell kits and loose incenses, smudges, that sort of thing. And I have seen people blatantly rip off her work and not state, you know, this idea was inspired by so-and-so. Likewise, I saw someone whose entire YouTube channel, and I mean, we're talking every video this woman ever produced, it's her face, it's her talking. Somebody took every one of her videos, uploaded it on a new channel as if it was their own, using her name, and monetized it. So somebody somewhere is getting money off of her videos without giving her any credit, and she's not getting a share of the money, and we don't know who this person is. It was reported to YouTube. That is highly unethical behavior. Let me be clear in stating that I do not necessarily think that hexing or cursing someone is unethical behavior. And I will clarify that, because I know some of you out there are going, some of you, diehard Wiccans are having a coronary and falling over right now. But I do not. I think that those things are tools there for the witch to use. A witch is someone who encompasses magic. Whether you use it for a primarily beneficial purpose or a primarily maledictive purpose is entirely due to your personal moral compass and what you are ethically comfortable with doing. Now, my personal code of ethics states to myself that I will not engage in any kind of magical practice that impedes on the free will of another person, especially if somebody else is involved. So, for example, when I do love spells, and I get asked to do love spells all the time, I will not do a love spell that causes someone to fall in love with someone else, or that will cause someone to leave an existing relationship, even if it's a bad one, to be with someone else, because it's not my place. That person is solely responsible for the relationship that they're in. They're in that relationship for a reason. They know their reasons, and it's not for me to impede, okay? It might look to someone on the outside, or for someone who wants to be with that person, that they are in a bad relationship. But without knowing all of the aspects, you run a great risk in harming someone that you have no intention of harming. For example, if there are children involved, if there's an elderly parent involved that this person is helping to care for who would be detrimentally affected by that. There's things that you don't even consider. It's like the old adage of, if you were to kill a butterfly, you don't know what great disaster is going to befall. And that's true. We really don't know how things are intertwined. We just know that everything is interconnected. Now, going back to my statement a second ago about I don't think that cursing and hexing is necessarily immoral or a bad thing or unethical. And what I mean by that is I have a strong sense of justice. If someone does something to harm someone else purposely, then I think that people have a right to balance that injustice. Okay? Now, a good example, going back to being careful about what you do, is there is a witch on YouTube who talked about an incident that occurred near where he lived that he had some unforeseen circumstances come out of. It turned out that there was a woman who was kidnapped by her then husband. I can't remember if they were legally married or if it was kind of like a common law sort of marriage, but her significant other kidnapped her and was torturing her because she was trying to leave the relationship. And when this witch got word of what had happened, he felt so strongly about this situation that he put out a spell that this person would return the person without doing any further harm. Now, the next day, the girl was released. The unforeseen part of that was that the man then went and killed himself. So, was the spell a part of that? It could have been. So you have circumstances that you need to consider when you're doing spells, because a certain amount of what you do is going to come back to you. Now, I'm not a big believer in the rule of 3 in terms of it's going to come back to you threefold. I don't necessarily believe that. However, as I've talked about in previous videos, I do believe in the concepts of physics and science. And so if you throw a rock into a pond, the ripples ripple out. Now, they ripple back in towards the source at some point once they reach the outer point of its going. If there's something to stop it, it's going to come back to that point. It's a wave. However, when it comes back, it's somewhat attenuated. It's not as strong. So I don't necessarily think it comes back to you stronger. But I do think you're going to feel the impact of that, because once again, we are all intertwined. So your moral compass or your standard of ethics should be based on the understanding that, 1, all things in the universe are connected in some way. So some level of what you send out is going to come back to you in some way. Number 2, if it's harming someone in some way, whether it be it's taking away from them financially, it's harming them physically, it's harming them emotionally, it's harming them mentally, that I would consider unethical behavior. Unless it is righting a wrong, and then you're rebalancing something. If you are, in other words, I don't believe in using magic in retribution, okay, per se, like to get revenge. Now, if you're trying to smooth things out, if you do a return to sender spell, if you do a binding spell, I have no problem with doing that, because it's not harming the other person, it's stopping the other person from doing any further damage to you or someone else. And that I don't have a problem with that ethically. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think that you need to consider any possible repercussions of your actions and bear in mind that there may be repercussions you weren't expecting, and you need to be prepared to take responsibility for that. For me, the number 1 core thing in ethics in the craft is taking responsibility for what you do. If you have done something, good or bad, own it. Stand up and say, yep, I did that, and then face your consequences. That, to me, is the core of being an ethical person. Now, stealing obviously is wrong. Don't have to go down that road again. Lying to someone to accomplish a goal is also wrong because you run the risk of harming someone in some way. Now, again, I'm not a big, preachy, harm none kind of person, but I do think that the moral of harm none holds at its core the fact that we are all interconnected. So when you harm someone else, eventually you're going to end up harming yourself in the long term. And so in order to preserve the net of humanity, so to speak, you really shouldn't do things that are going to harm other people. However, I think that a lot of people get confused with the craft because we don't have a set book or a set of rules that defines the moral compass. I think ethics in witchcraft comes from the core of who the witch is themselves, and that it belies, it ends up with universal law. So those principles, when they are violated, trust me, the universe is going to let you know you've done something bad, because something bad will eventually happen to you. That doesn't mean that everything that's bad that happens to you is because you did something bad to somebody else. Okay, you stepped on an ant. Oops, okay, now, a tree falls on your house. It's not the same kind of thing, okay? And I'm not talking causality here. I'm talking about the spiritual effects of that will come back. So my view on ethics in the craft is you have to go with your own gut instinct in something. If you feel like something is wrong, then it is probably wrong. So I would recommend you don't do it. If you are angry or you're doing some magic in a state where you are not fully aligned with spirit, then I would state that that's probably wrong and you probably don't want to do it. So that's my spiel. Y'all have a great evening. Blessed be.